Good evening, everybody. This is Mike with On Point Preparedness. Have a little bit of an unscheduled live stream for you all again on the CV19 that we've been talking about. I want to share with you some research specifically on why cases in the United States are so low. It's actually led to a whole bunch of conspiracy theories, as I mentioned in my prior video. Why are we seeing these pockets in only certain countries? We haven't really seen it in the US. I hope to shed some light on why that is, because I think there's a definitive reason. So everything that I'm going to share with you is from the CDC. It's also from some pretty reliable sources. So hopefully you can test this for yourself and see that it's truth. So let me go ahead. I see you're all piling into the live stream here. And let's go ahead and take a look at some real research. This will be a really quick video. So I imagine this will probably only be about 15 minutes. So let me just go ahead and share my screen here, show you what's going on. All right. So we are looking at CDC Gov, and this is information for laboratories regarding the CV19 virus. Now, you have to understand that this test to diagnose the virus is what's called reverse transcriptase real-time PCR. It's a test that a lot of laboratories are capable of doing. However, the CDC has to send out these kits so that people can test. Basically, there's something called a primer, which is like a unique fingerprint for this virus. And you do this PCR assay, and this unique fingerprint primer will find a match if a sample is in fact contaminated with the virus. And what happens is in this PCR assay, it just replicates over and over and over and over and over again until you have this really strong match. You have a really strong signal because this primer was able to find its unique match and get amplified multiple times over. But the one thing I want you to understand is that this test kit comes out of the CDC, and it was sent to only CDC authorized laboratories on or around February 4th, 2020. Now, just a little quick reminder, they want to highlight that a laboratory that is not designated by the CDC as a qualified laboratory and is implementing a CV19 diagnostic test, other than this one particular assay, they need to get confirmation from the FDA. So that right there is an okay thing, that you want qualified laboratories to be performing this test so that you have real numbers. But again, I just want to highlight that this is one reason why you don't have this real big amount of cases in the US. There is a limited set of labs that are qualified to do that test. But more importantly than that, this is what I really want to highlight, and this is what I think is the real sticker for why we don't see so many cases, other than the fact that this originated in China. So naturally, it's going to have more cases out in Europe as well as Asia. What I wanted to highlight here is for a person to be qualified for this test, the CDC is saying that you need to have these clinical features and you need to have this type of epidemiological risk. If you don't have these, you're not necessarily qualified to get tested by the diagnostic test. Again, there's a very limited number of these tests that they're handing out to these qualified laboratories. So they are purposefully having restricted criteria in order for you to even get a test. So if you have flu-like symptoms or pneumonia-like symptoms, that's not going to qualify you for the test. You have to have, and let me just go ahead and show this to you. You have to have these clinical features. You have to have fever and signs or symptoms of respiratory distress or pneumonia. Okay, well that's pretty straightforward. But notice the and. These are CDC guidelines. And you have to be any person, including healthcare workers, who has had close contact with. Now keep in mind the language here. Laboratory confirmed CV19 patient within 14 days of symptom onset. So a confirmed case. You have to have had close contact with a confirmed case and show these clinical features. Or the other two options are that you've been to the Hubei province in China or the mainland China within 14 days. That is really restrictive guidance in terms of being qualified to even take this test. And again, the only way you can actually get a confirmed diagnosis of having CV is if you take the test. So if you put these stringent measures on who is qualified to even take the test, then naturally your numbers are going to be small. Now, these criteria that you're seeing here, that was probably appropriate in the initial phases, maybe December and January of this pandemic. However, at this case where you're seeing it spread across the world, at least for the past couple weeks, this is completely outdated guidance. Absolutely outdated guidance, because we know that it's not just in China, it is in a lot of places. And so just by nature of them restricting this to confirmed patients or those that have visited China, people aren't getting tested. And that is a reason why you're having low numbers in the States. That alone is good evidence for why we have low numbers. But I want to extrapolate this even further to show you how bad this is. And this isn't anything new. This is typical big government, typical just slow reactionary response of big government. And you just have this huge delay. So again, you understand here that the only way you get qualified for a test is if you visited China or had direct contact with a confirmed patient. That's a very restrictive criteria. And so naturally, let's take a look here. This is again on cdc.gov. Total number of people tested within the United States by CDC-approved laboratories is 426. 426. Keep that number in mind, okay? Because let's take a look at this. This test kit that they have sent out to the states, I just want to make mention that there are issues with validating the test. Basically, every test that you send out has to have positive and negative controls. You have to validate it to make sure that it's actually working. While some states are having issues with the test, this is also a reason why there's delays. But I more importantly want to make mention of this right here. South Korea has run more than 35,000 tests. The United States has only tested 426. That is staggering. That is a staggering failure. And that is really what I wanted to show you. And not just South Korea. I want to show you British Columbia and Canada, what they're testing as well. 35,000 tests have been performed in South Korea versus the 426 tests that have been performed by the CDC in the United States of America, which is highly limited by the criteria which qualifies you for actually being able to take this test, and the fact that these tests are having some issues, some faults with them. That's pretty staggering. And again, that's really not conspiracy. This is straight from the CDC website. You can see the bottleneck. There is just an absolutely apparent bottleneck with how they've proceduralized this. Now, I want to show you population of the United States is 327.2 million. That was back in 2018. It's probably risen from then, but I want to show you an equation. I'm going to show you that we've done 426 tests within America for a population of 327.2 million people. Okay, I want to show you British Columbia and some of their metrics here. So this is on Richmond News for CV19. British Columbia has completed a significant amount of tests, says the health minister. Let's take a look and see how many tests. As of this past Friday, 677 people and 996 samples have been tested for the virus. 677 tests, which far surpasses the 426 that have been done for the entire United States. Let's take a look at the British Columbia population, 5.071 million in 2019. So I want to show you this little, very simple calculation that I've put up for you all. British Columbia, number of tests per populace If you just do a simple division of the 5.071 million residents of British Columbia divided by the 600 and some tests that I mentioned, that is at a rate of about one person tested per 7,490 persons. British Columbia. Using the 327 million populace that was in the United States with the 426 tests that we have run, that equals one person tested per 768,075 persons. I hope you see the disparate disconnect here. The fact that South Korea has run 35,000 tests, a much smaller country than the United States, which has a lot more, the United States has a lot more money and a lot more capability. South Korea, not so much. They're running 35,000 tests. British Columbia, with a population of only 5 million, has run more tests than the United States of America. And the United States of America is only testing at a rate of one person per almost 800,000. Again, for various reasons. One, because of bureaucracy and the slowness of government. Two, because there were some issues with the test kit. It's sort of confusing as to why there is not one harmonized test kit across the world at this point. Beats me. I don't know how China's doing one way, South Korea's doing another way, Iran's doing one way, U.S. is doing another way. You think that the world would come together and have, one specific test. But, who am I? So there's tests, there's issues with the test. And then more importantly, what I really wanted to highlight is this extremely restrictive criteria for healthcare workers on when to administer the test. Actually, I did miss a slide here. Let me go ahead and show you, where is it? Yeah, here we go. Let me show you British Columbia, how they view the criteria on when to administer a test. And again, thinking with a lawyer mind, thinking with a legal framework of mind, just look at the language that's for British Columbia and let's compare it back to the United States. Okay, here is their guidance on who to test. Testing is available for patients with compatible symptoms, okay, fever, cough, respiratory distress, and history of travel to the affected area of China within 2 weeks prior to illness onset or index of suspicion. Okay, so the first part of this is pretty much identical to the United States, except for the latter part, or other index of suspicion, e.g., for example, contact with an ill person with such travel history. It's very loose language. If there is suspicion, for example, it's not just saying this is the only example. For example, contact with an ill person with travel history. Or if the doctor in their own medical professional expertise decides that this is a suspicious case, they can submit this test. Versus the United States, and again, think with a legal lawyer mindset here, they say any person, including healthcare workers, who has close contact with a laboratory confirmed 2019 CV test patient. I mean, that is very restrictive. That is very, very specific. And I believe that is one of the primary reasons why we have only tested 426 persons out of a population of 327 million people, whereas other countries are making leaps and bounds in terms of protecting the populace and doing more tests. Now, does that mean we have cases exploding here in the United States? No, we don't have that data. I can't just say that it's everywhere. But you can see the gross misrepresentation of the real numbers, or the potential for gross misrepresentation of the numbers because of the lack of testing, right? If it's not documented, it never happened. And that's an all right thing to assume, right? Like you don't just get treated for diabetes just on a hunch that you have diabetes. You have to have a confirmed diagnosis. That's a legitimate thing. You need to have one of these test kits. You need to undergo the test to actually have a confirmed case. But again, if you have this highly restricted criteria, you're not going to be eligible for the test. Now, again, you can think whatever you want in terms of, whether this is purposeful just to push down the numbers, or this is just, typical government bureaucracy. I can't really make a statement in terms of the United States other than you should be able to see at face value this is just wrong. But I do know other countries have, like China, legitimately used this to their advantage. There were lots of reports from hospitals complaining that the Chinese government was not sending sufficient number of tests to diagnose people, that they had patients that they had to turn around and send home and say, you just need to self-quarantine, because the only way you can get administered to the hospital, because we're maxed out, is if you have a confirmed diagnosis, and we don't have enough tests to diagnose you. So again, you can see how that plays to the Chinese advantage. But for the U.S., it's mostly just because of this bureaucracy and this highly restricted criteria for evaluation. It's just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And the fact, when I just found this, that South Korea, within a week, a week and a half, they've tested 35,000 people. That is something. Again, I recommended that channel, Coriana Jones. There's also some other doctors that have been talking about the proliferation of this virus in South Korea. The consistent message that I'm getting is a lot of people do really trust the South Korean government. They don't think there's manipulation of the data, or very limited manipulation of the data. And so, it appears, with them running that many tests, it seems like they very much are trying to take care of the populace. So props to them. But here in the United States, it's good that the CDC put out a notice today saying that we are likely going into a global pandemic and that we do need to prepare. I think that's a very good step. But in terms of the numbers and why they're so low, I hope this gives you some visibility as to a very probable reason why that is. I do want to close this. I didn't want to make it too long. But again, I just wanted to address the whole 5G thing again, because I'm getting so many people asking me about whether this is caused by 5G. My personal opinion is that, so there's some people that think all these symptoms are completely related to 5G and there is no virus at all. My rebuttal to all those people is, when you start having cases in your area, I better not see you in a mask. I better not see you purchasing a mask, because essentially what you're doing is telling people that there is no virus and you don't need to protect yourself because this is 5G. I hope you trust your research that much that you don't engage in hypocrisy and go buy yourself a mask. I'm sorry, but that makes me a little upset that people will get that conspiratorial to say there is no virus. Now, could it be a combination of 5G and virus? Possibly. But as I mentioned in my last video, this is proliferating across multiple nations, across multiple cruise ships, across nations with various levels of technology. Like I said, when you start to see this get into third world areas of countries like India or Africa or other regions which don't have 5G capability, that whole theory that this is all based by 5G is going to be really hard to stand on. And so again, I personally don't submit to the 5G theory. It does not mean that I undermine the fact that there might be 5G health effects. Absolutely. There's a lot of suspicion about why they're not doing health tests and they're just rushing into this quickly. There is most definitely probably some detrimental health effects like cancer and like things like that might happen. But to see such a proliferative pneumonia-like issue that's killing lots of people more than the numbers that they're telling us, I have a hard time believing that's 5G. And I have a hard time believing that in every single one of these cases that we're seeing across the world, there has to be some type of satellite 5G installation that's causing it. You have to juggle a lot of things in order to make that work. You're going to have to start saying this country and that country and that country and this cruise ship line and this cruise ship line and try to find the 5G connection in every single one of these things. I'm just not there. So again, if you want to think that there's a combination between a virus and a 5G, that's fine. But to the people that are actually putting out information saying that there is no virus and this is only caused by 5G, that is a very serious thing. That is a very serious thing, because you're teaching people that they don't really need to prepare, that this is some other conspiracy. That just makes me a little bit upset, to be honest. So, and also, as I mentioned in my last video, they are governments, not just the US, governments, South Korea, as you've seen, British Columbia, as you've seen, the United States, they are sending out test kits, reverse transcriptase, real-time PCR with a primer that has a specific fingerprint for this virus. They are sending these test kits out, and people are getting tested, and they're getting positive results. There is a virus. It's, I don't know why there has to be an additional conspiracy on top of the fact that this might be a biological weapon that was released and we're in a global pandemic. I mean, isn't that conspiracy enough? I don't know. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit, upset really over some of the stuff that's coming out here, because there's just such a proliferation of information. I mean, that's what the Bible says too. Knowledge will go to and fro, and there's just too much knowledge. And so we really need to just test everything, spiritually test everything in the secular world, test it, not panic, not be a slave or bondservant to fear, and, just try to do our best to sort our way through this whole thing. So hopefully this was some good information for you as to why I think that the numbers are significantly represented. I sure hope that the CDC revises this. I have to imagine at some point they will, with some of the statements that they came out with. But again, up to date, this should have been changed at least a month ago. When we started to see cases outside of China, this should have been revised to where, it should have been loosened. It really should have been loosened to allow medical practitioners the flexibility to send the test if they have a suspicion of CV19. Just my thoughts. Anywho, hope you enjoyed this. A little bit more animated than usual, just because I'm getting somewhat passionate for this subject and a lot of the disinformation that's being shared. So, apologize if that upset anyone, but just trying to arm you, with some really good, solid information. So this is Mike with On Point Preparedness. God bless everybody. Have a good one.